Ah, saddle up. We're going to Grandma's house.
Yeah, okay.
Sit her down.
Okay, let me just save my game.
So, back in the old days, when you wanted to save your game, you used to write these crazy passwords down, and while it looked right as you double-checked it, you'd come back later and enter an incorrect password. Where did you go wrong? Because these things were a bitch to write down, or the game didn't have a save function. You would then leave the machine on overnight so you could continue playing the next morning. Then, you would leave the machine on while you were in school, and then come back hoping you didn't burn the damn house down. When I was younger, I acted sick at school in the middle of the day so I could run home before my parents turned it off or the console burned up. So now we come to the point where we want to find out, how did passwords and memory save work? In the early video game days, there was no need for saving games since these games usually had no actual plot to develop and were generally very short in length. Then developers started to make games that had stories and longer gameplay. Something was needed to save a player's progress. Battery backup was expensive at the time, and magnetic disk storage did not come to North America due to piracy concerns. This brings us to passwords and passcodes. For games from the 8-bit and 16-bit eras, game passwords were a common method for players to save their progress or access specific levels and features. Now, depending on what kind of data needed to be preserved determined the length of the password. A simple game that kept track of level, health, lives, and some items could have used a code that was 8 to 12 characters long. And some passcodes were represented by colored dots on a grid pattern, like Mega Man 3. A more complex game, like The Legend of Zelda, could have had a code that was around 116 characters long. Here's how it typically worked. There were alphanumeric codes. Game passwords were typically composed of letters, often uppercase, and numbers. These were usually created at any time from a menu. Encoding the game state. Upon reaching a certain point in the game, players would receive a password that encoded their current game state. This would include the player's level, number of lives, collected items, and other relevant data. An example is basic encryption. The values taken from the player's progress are reorganized in a different pattern. Then some modular addition is thrown in, and a 7 is added to each digit, and the tens column is thrown out, which then turns into this. In some cases, with an effort to prevent tampering, error detection is used when the checksum is incorporated into a password. An example of this is to sum every digit in the code using modular addition and then append the result at the end of the password. When decoding the password, to resume their game, players would enter the password at the title screen or specific password entry screen. The game would then decode the password, restoring the player's progress to the state it was represented. It would reverse the modular addition process, and if it corresponds to a valid entry, the game will resume. Otherwise, it would let you know that you have a bad password. Genius, I say. With passcodes comes sharing and cheating. Players often shared passwords with friends or found them in gaming magazines and on online forums. This sharing culture sometimes led to cheating, as players used passwords to access levels or items they hadn't earned. But who cares, right? We all did it. I know I did. I know you did. Now, there were limitations. While convenient for games lacking save functionality, passwords had drawbacks. They could be long and cumbersome to enter, prone to errors when transcribed, and were less flexible and robust compared to modern save systems. Overall, game passwords were a simple but effective way for players to save their progress in older video games. As the video games got larger and more complex, a different method was required to save game progress. Here comes battery backup. The Legend of Zelda was the first NES game to feature a battery backup save function. It allowed you to save your progress to a RAM chip that was sustained by a small 3-volt button battery. Aha! It was simple. Play the game for a few hours, Enter the save menu and select the save slot you want to go on and save your game. Now, some games when you saved ask you to hold the reset button down when you turn the power off. Why'd you do this? It's because the NES was still executing CPU instructions, and if you hit the power button, it killed the power to the system, which the CPU was still possibly write to separate areas of the memory, and that could possibly corrupt your game file. Now, holding the reset button down while powering off halts the CPU code execution, making power down safe. Sort of like Windows 95 back in the old days when you would turn it off and it'd say it's safe to shut this computer down. Anyways, when you came back to play your game, you'd load your save file, and there your game was, like you never left it. And you'd play again for a few hours, save the game, and repeat the process. Then when you were finished, you'd return the game to your local Blockbuster Video. And then the next weekend when you went to go rent the game, you went to rent it, you found it, you hoped that your game files were still there, and it wasn't, and you were all mad. All that work for nothing. If there was 3 save files, I used to save my game on the 3rd or the last memory slot. That way, if anybody else played it, or rented it, then they would play the first 2 slots, and my game would always be there. Never worked every time, but worked sometimes, and it was glorious when I found my old game file there. And now we have hard disks, autosave, and cloud save, which makes writing passwords down a thing of the past. Well, there you have it. If you enjoy content like this, please hit that like button, and consider subscribing to my channel as it helps the channel grow. Thanks for watching.